All right, everybody. Another writing video for you. And this one is going to deal with the concepts of gardeners or architects, pantsers or plotters, which, there's been quite a few videos describing the differences between the two, but hopefully my approach and my take on this subject will be a little bit different. And hopefully, be able to solve some of your own confidence issues and maybe even some writing block issues or writer's block issues. And basically to, let those that are new to the writing world or those that have forgotten, a plotter or architect is basically someone that spends a lot of time setting everything up, building an outline, building the framework for a story. And that's, where their main focus and approach of getting everything ready to write. They're very, focused on the fine details before they actually even dive into the prose itself. Whereas a pantser or gardener, pantser being someone that writes by the seat of their pants, basically meaning they just dive right in and start writing, maybe not without any idea of beginning, middle, end, or the plot points along the way, and they're just kind of trying to see what happens, see if their muse kicks in and they come up with something good. And like there's George R.R. Martin and Stephen King are two examples of authors that do a lot of exploratory writing and are basically pantsers or gardeners, if you will. And a lot of authors kind of seem to identify as being one or the other. And my I guess question would be is why not be both at the same time? And I think that will solve the problems for a lot of people, especially new writers, especially those that haven't really developed a process yet, and or like I said, very new to this. You don't have to automatically choose what you are as if that's all there is. You're one or the other. Personally, I'm doing a pretty long series. I'm spending basically, maybe 75-80% of my time world building and getting everything set up just right, because I like to have the gist of what's all taking place, the main plot points as they're going along, and everything kind of lined up. I want to have a logical consistency, of cause and effect going on through the story, to avoid plot holes. Plus, I'm, the level of detail that that I'm using to build the world is pretty in depth and intricate. So I'm spending a lot of time doing research and becoming familiar with, different, things that'll contribute to elements of the story. So yeah. But at the same time, I'm still jotting down, chapter ideas and prose and just typing out stuff and dialogue and all that too, so that I'm making progress in both areas. And I think when people identify as being only one or the other, there's a greater possibility that they will at some point run into writer's block. Because if you're super into, the architect approach, where you're basically everything is just, perfectly set up. Every single major plot point, even though the little connecting plot points, you have it pretty much the whole outline just, completely, there's no wiggle room for change or anything like that. I'm dead set. This is how I'm going to be. You may run into a point where you can't go further in the story, because even though you think you've foolproofed your current project, so that all you have to do is go in and fill in the chapters and flesh out in what's inside the skeleton, or within the framework of the story you're telling. You may suddenly, hit a point where it doesn't work as how you thought it, the way you've been writing, and all of a sudden you run into maybe a logical issue, or where something doesn't make sense, a plot hole issue, and you're so, like I said, in that mindset of being an outliner that you can't really start to think outside of the box, which if you were to incorporate a little bit of that exploratory writing and just, diving in and trying something completely different to see if it will work, it'll help you, possibly break through that writer's block barrier. Because, like you said, I think, the architect approach, you're very in control. I don't know if it applies to people with certain personality traits where, you really need this sense of security that, everything is just plotted out perfectly. Whereas, a person that's a gardener or pantser may, not worry about that at all. They may just love the thought of just, throwing caution to the wind and seeing where the story takes them. But at the same time, you may wander, as a gardener or pantser, you may wander all over the place, and to the point where you may have, a ton of stuff written down, but that it looks like an amoeba. It's like a blob that's got, little appendages sticking outside, all over the place, and there's no real, exterior to, kind of contain it and provide direction. So you may end up just kind of writing in circles, going back through and just, and erasing a bunch of stuff and then starting over and wandering more. You may draw things out. Like I said, you don't have to stay on the straight and narrow path, for the whole time, because, that will make things pretty rigid. But like I said, and I think that's a problem with that authors like George R. R. Martin have run into, is that's kind of their bread and butter is being an exploratory writer. So, the ideas come and they follow them into whatever, destination it'll lead them. And sometimes the destination is a dead end or is or the corner that they've painted themselves into. And then they don't have any other kind of, other set of tools, which, like in the architect way of thinking, and they're stuck. And, A Song of Ice and Fire, I think, is a great example of that. You had 3 books that were well contained. They had a story that followed a logical, for the most part, logical sequence of events. I'm sure people can argue one way or the other about that, but it was very tightly written. Everything looked, served a purpose. The story had a good flow to it. It had moved along. And then after that, things started to kind of get out of control. You had, a lot of characters with unresolved storylines. And, that you're basically, 6 books into the series over all of this time that's taken to write them. And you're still, the end doesn't really look like it's anywhere in sight. So you can probably find an effective way of doing things by combining both aspects of and both approaches. So my advice, I guess, would be, if you're like me and you really like to structure everything, because, for me, for my storytelling, I just want cause and effect and, in a logical, effect from actions taken to be, I find that very important, because I don't like plot holes. To me, that's, it just seems like really sloppy writing. I think it also prevents running into problems in the future where the sequence of events all of a sudden, starts to not make sense. And then you've spent all this time writing that big chunk, and then all of a sudden you're, back to the drawing board, which isn't necessarily the end of the world. But I like to, set myself up for success by having all of that kind of ironed out. That's just my mindset, my approach. But at the same time, if that's all you're doing is, outlining and world building, then you're and not doing any actual writing, within the chapters themselves, then, you're kind of, you're kind of in the thralls of world building syndrome, I guess you could call it, where that's such a focus that you're, you may be becoming a bit neurotic about it. and that everything is not completely in its perfect place, like a feng shui, where everything has to be exactly in its every piece of the puzzle has to be perfectly aligned before you even get started writing like the actual story itself. So I would encourage those that are strongly drawn to the architect approach to outline it like you would normally, but also take the time away from that to just write little, excerpts, write little conversations between characters that are going to take place, write little several paragraph chunks that could fit in a chapter somewhere, so that you're also, getting into actually, fleshing out that outline in little bits, in pieces. And like I said, you don't necessarily have to put them in a certain order. Because, for me, it starts, a story starts with just these little kind of abstract ideas that I don't really have, the first clue as far as how they're going to fit in the story as a whole. But I want to get them down on paper or on a, Word document so that they're there. Because then I can go back and read them, and hopefully that sparks some other ideas. And when I'm working on my outline, then I can see, well, yeah, that'll fit perfectly in this chapter because, this has happened before, and then this event, blah, blah, blah. And that, goes on, and then I, start, like I said, building on that, because you're at the same time, you're actually doing the writing itself, because outlining, world building and outlining is not writing in the, it kind of is, but it's not the meat and potatoes of actually of the writing itself, as compared to actually sitting down and writing the prose and, putting the story on paper. Because like some people like to just world build and outline and for, fun, or they do tabletop role playing games and anything, but they're not writing out, an actual story. They're kind of giving the brief overview and so on and so forth. So for the architects, don't, incorporate some of the Gardner Pantzer stuff. Like I said, you may, even if you're, you have everything set out nice and precise, don't be horrified at the idea that you may have to, give a little bit of leeway, and see what, and take a risk and see what happens. Especially if, you're hitting the wall with writer's block. And the same thing goes with, like I said, on the opposite side with the Pantsers and Gardners. Don't be afraid of the idea that the outline is going to restrict you, or, it's going to streamline your creative, output, and not leave any freedom for you to really explore the language and, the every aspect of the story and the prose and whatnot. Because I think, some people are worried by, well, if I make my process too systematic, then I'm going to churn out, something that doesn't have a, much soul or life of its own, and doesn't, convey the same emotion as if I'm just, letting my imagination run wild and, and kind of drawing from that font of, inspiration. So yeah, because you could just write in circles or write all over the place. You still at some point have to put these things into, some kind of logical order, or you're not going to be able to keep an audience's attention if they're just meandering and wandering all over the place, like somebody that's lost in the desert. So don't be afraid to incorporate both. That would be my advice. From the very beginning, especially if you're new to it, don't think that one is superior to the other. Try to do both. Even if you're just, experimenting with both, do experiment with some exploratory writing where you just start out with a basic premise, or, you have a character that's, finds themselves, in an old abandoned castle or something, or finds themselves in in the woods, at night, and, or, any kind of situation, where you can start from, and then just go from there and just see, where you can end up. And, because that might inspire you to start, thinking of the story as a whole, and then you can go back and start outlining for it, and vice versa. So yeah, don't be afraid to do one or the other. And don't, because I think you'll be able to develop, different sets of skills that'll benefit you in the long run, and you'll probably have a better time avoiding writer's block, because you can switch your gears, and that'll help kind of spark your creative faculties, I guess you could say, for in your mind. And even if it's, you start just kind of exploratory writing with a completely different book or novel in mind, it may snap you out of something. It may, spark something that relates back to you're previously working on that you got stuck on. So, yep, I would say embrace both the architect and the gardener. You may have a certain ratio of one to the other, but don't be afraid to do both, because ultimately, it's going to, I think, benefit you the most when it comes to your creative process. All right, that's about everything. So until next time, folks, take it easy. I hope you're having a good day, and I'll be out with another video very soon. Take it easy.